All right, thanks, folks. That's a less than graceful entrance as I shifted off of the studio mode and it went to the window I was editing.
Oh,
I
good.
wasn't. Yeah, I thought it was going to go to the other one. Anyway, welcome, folks, back to Variant Roles. Thanks for sticking around after Avernus. I am Dan Gaston at MadsIDM on Twitter. He, him pronouns. Thanks, Emma, for renewing your subscription.
Oh,
Excellent.
yay.
We appreciate it. And Eugenio, you can
Hi,
introduce
everybody.
yourself.
Probably most of you just saw me do my outro, but I'll introduce myself anyway for the VOD. My name's Eugenio, also known as your friendly neighborhood dungeon master. I've never tripped up on that. DM Jazzy Hands, and along with Dan and Alex on the creative council here at Variant Roles.
Excellent. All right. So this is our very first episode of, I guess, what's going to be quasi bi-weekly, I think, for right now.
It's sort of the hope.
Yeah, that's the hope. We'll see how it works. Variant Roles reviews, where we're going to go through some products that we have. I think most of these are things we've been given, probably in future some things that we just have or buy or seek out on our own, and talk about it.
Yeah.
So, Eugenio, do you want to start us off with this one? I guess up front we should
Sure.
say that this is a product we have been donated to us, so we haven't paid this, but we haven't been compensated in any other way.
Correct. Yeah. So the folks at Avantris reached Avantris. That's a different game. At Arcanus reached out to us. I met with one of the creators at Gen Con, where we got a physical copy of the book, and we've also been provided with PDFs, like Dan said. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about it. So Arcanus is a campaign setting for 5e that's been around for almost 20 years. It was first published in 2001. Which would have been 3.5 age, right? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So it's been around. It's been around for a while. There was a Living Arcanus sort of campaign, much like there was Living Greyhawk, and like we now sort of have the Adventures League, where there's a continuous story. So that went on for a while. I don't know if that's still active officially, but I'm sure some people still sort of are a part of that. So it's been around for a long time. Lots of history, lots of established lore in this world, and so the folks with Arcanus decided to port it over to 5e to make some adjustments, make some changes, update it for the new edition, and continue the story of Arcanus. Where is my outline of what we're going to do? Here we go.
I've got a screen capture of the PDF up on the
great
overlay if you haven't seen, so we can go to page numbers and everyone's looking at the level.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. So yeah, if you're looking at the cover, you can see the art is pretty great for this book. I mean, it was the publisher is listed as Paradigm Concepts, and it looks like they took some time and some care. They hired some great artists. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here. The book itself is pretty hefty. It's, let's see, not including the index. Yeah, it's 410 pages. So it's a pretty hefty book, but there's a lot in here. There's a ton of information about the setting, but there's also a lot of really unique races and character classes and magic options and magic items and backgrounds and things like that. It really takes a lot of the basic player's handbook character options and changes them up. If you're going to play an Arcanus and you're going to use this product, there's a ton of stuff, and you could really, I mean, obviously the core rules are not in here, but you could pretty much take all of your character creation directly from this book without ever having to go into the player's handbook or any of the other official Wizards of the Coast materials.
Yeah, and to give people an idea of heft for like the pure player facing content, the first almost 200 pages is races, classes, backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like you don't hit equipment to like 201.
Yeah.
So, and then you've got like magic and psionics as well, as other sort of player facing things that are like a bit later.
Yeah, looking at this table of contents, it looks like true DM stuff, like world lore, story hook, that kind of stuff.
Small.
Super small. It doesn't actually start till looks like page 307. So this is definitely worth it for players and DMs who want to play in this setting. And, quite frankly, I think everything you need to play in the setting is here. I don't know if they have plans to release, adventure modules or anything like that, but this one product is definitely enough to set you up.
Yeah, because it's got a bestiary in there, so some extra monsters, a few little magic items, but like 95% of this book is player content.
Yeah, and there is a lot of it, right? And I will say there are certain. We'll get into the specifics of this. There are a few places where it's a little dense. Reading through character classes can always be a bit of a slog if you're unfamiliar with it. One thing that I sort of realized as I was reading through this, one of the things that I was a little bit balking at when I went through the character options was just that it had been so long since I'd had to learn a class from the ground up. And these are because the authors tried to tie in world lore and explain why these classes are the way they are. There's a lot of text for each of the options, and so all of that together was a little bit much until I sort of realized what I was reacting to and sort of chilled out.
Yeah. I've had times when I'm skimming through the subclass options for a class because they're extensive, and hadn't yet noticed that I had moved on to a new class.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Because it's just like there is so much there, and it's like you said, as a new person skimming through, it might be easy to sort of get overwhelmed. But I think as a resource, it is fantastic because there is just so much there. Like the sheer amount of subclasses with different flavors and mechanics is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, should we? So, anything else sort of in the general that we want to talk about before we jump in?
No, take us away.
Okay, so let's sort of hop in. So the first, like we mentioned, the first 150 some odd pages before we get to even backgrounds has race options and class options. And let me see if I do a quick count. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we've got 9 races and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 classes. And some of the races are look vaguely familiar to us. We see names like dwarf and gnome and human. And then some of them are brand new to us. We see things called Ellery and Keo and Undir. But as you hop in, you realize that even the races that look sort of familiar to you are not exactly, not exactly what you expect. These race sub chapters, whatever you want to call them, are also pretty hefty because, again, we're looking at these races from a different perspective than the Forgotten Realms, than Greyhawk, than basic D&D. So there's a lot of world lore that's included in these passages. For me, there's a lot of really great stuff. I think like I keep saying, the lore is so rich and is so fleshed out. There's a lot of information. It like I said, it can be a bit much, but if you really are the type that wants to dive in deep and heavy in lore, these race sections have a ton of history for you to do. And if you don't, just like in the Player's Handbook, you can see pretty easily laid out where the important mechanical aspects are, right? You can go to dwarf traits, you can go to the sub-race traits, you see those little italic bold sub-headlines, and you can find your stats right away. So in terms of organization, it's pretty good. Anything you want to start with there, Races? I do have other thoughts, but anything you want to start with just in terms of sort of the layout for us?
No, I think it is fairly well laid out. I'd say it follows like a fairly standard 5e layout in terms of how they do subheadings. It's obviously different text, but I think if you're used to skimming through a 5e like WotC or Kobold Press book, you'll be able to navigate it the same way.
Yeah, definitely. As you look into the specifics of those subheadings, though, that you will recognize, you'll see some things that are a little different. And this is going to be something that we talk about sort of as we go. There are a lot of restrictions written into Arcanis. Most of them race-based, a few of them actually gender-based. And I do think I speak for both of us, and you feel free to correct me or elaborate, Dan. That was the one thing about this setting that stood out to us as not being super ideal. I want to say right up front that as you go a little bit deeper into the lore of Arcanis, I do see a lot of evidence, and when I spoke to the creator at Gen Con, I know this to be true since its inception in 2001. A lot of the lore very much subverts sort of real world racial stereotypes, which is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
A lot, particularly in the history of the humans in this world, we see a lot of images of humans of color that have, you know, soaring societies, and in terms of sort of interhuman racial issues and things like that, I think they do a beautiful job of being very inclusive. The art for the humans is super inclusive, and all of that is great. Unfortunately, on the flip side, we sort of pass off some of the things that we managed to fix with the humans onto other player races, which is not my favorite thing about this setting. You know, as a dungeon master, you of course can adjust the lore as you see fit, and you can leave out or add any sort of story to sort of deal with that you want. But since we're reviewing what was provided to us and the written material, I think it's worth noting that there are a few what I feel are somewhat problematic restrictions and histories and lore based on both race and gender in the book. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. The one sort of, I think, maybe element of, I don't want to call it positive, but like nuance there is that most of the races, at least in my read through, that have some of these elements where, like, you know, frankly make me somewhat uncomfortable. Right,
yeah, totally.
Are not put onto the races that in typical D&D we would be seen as coded as people of color, or monstrous, right? It's not like the orcs being evil. In some cases, it's the more, you know, shall we say, white-coded races, like
absolutely
the dwarves, right? The dwarves are a cursed race in this setting, and, you know, most people are thinking of their dwarves as, you know, Scotsmen or whatever, right? So there is a little bit of where I still think it's problematic, but it's perhaps less problematic than it could be, or that we would see in some other things.
And I think you can sort of tell by the way that we're both talking about this, like there is definitely a sense that these folks that put this together had some really great intentions and did some really great work on this. I think some of what we're seeing and reacting to, I have a feeling, is sort of stuff that was taken from the early incarnations of Arcanis. And I actually noticed that we'll talk about this too when we get to some of the mechanics of like classes and magic. I see a lot of stuff that was taken, what I assume was taken directly from the 3.5 stuff, and just sort of mechanically updated without sort of like doing the spiritual update, the philosophical update that we see with 5th edition coming from Wizards of the Coast side. And I think this might be one of them, right? I think the lore of these races and the restrictions on certain classes based on your race and your gender, I think those are things that have been a part of Avantris since before we, and this does not excuse it, but I think it's been a part of I keep saying Avantris, of Arcanis, since before we were good and aware of these things, right? So yeah, I think that's something definitely to be aware of as you dive into this book. Great. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Say like there's elements that this is, especially I think for a lot of people playing with the mindsets that like we approach, how we play at our tables, like on this channel, like that sort of thing. There's elements where if you're going to play this as is, right, as a setting, you need to talk about it with your table in a good session 0.
Yes. Right? Oh, absolutely. Like absolutely.
It's a world where slavery exists. It's right. Like, you know, with like different legal standards in different nations, and it's handled in a sort of quasi historical approach. But those are all things that either I'm not going to include, which would probably be how I would play it.
Sure.
Or, you know, if it's a topic that you want to deal with at your table, that you really need a good, strong session 0 and to talk with your players.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm flipping through the book because we had a great question from Emma in chat about the inclusivity, not just of sort of race things, but of body type. So I'm flipping through right now to try and find a good page with some art to throw up to show you all examples of that. But while I look, we can sort of keep talking. Do we want to house? Go ahead.
I'm sort of just like scrolling through the PDF. So
okay, great.
People will see it coming up as well.
Okay, great. If I find a specific place, I'll hop you to that. In the meantime, do we want to how deeply do we want to sort of dig into the specifics of the races here in Arcanis?
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe some of the new ones are.
Yeah, I think that's
sort of talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say sort of I think I haven't actually counted the pages, but my guess is the largest chunk of the race section is devoted to the Ellery. The Ellery are this sort of fascinating.
I think I think the Val might top them out.
Oh, you're right. The Val might top them.
But the Ellery are definitely number 2.
I think you're absolutely right. So the Ellery are looking at them. They look like your pretty standard elves, essentially, though that's not exactly what they are and not exactly their history. But the Ellery have, let's see, how many subclasses do they have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have 5 subclasses, which sort of explains, to begin with, some of the space that was dedicated to them. And each of them have something called bloodline powers. They have an additional ability score called blood rank, and so a lot of this space is taken up for as they level up, they can choose to increase their blood rank and gain these certain bloodline powers. The Ellery are the creations of the 4 great elemental lords in Arcanis. They were originally, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be mixing this race up, but I don't think I am. These are the ones that were created to be essentially servitors to the 4 great elemental lords when they lived on Arcanis proper. And they were sort of made to do pretty horrible things in service to, oh wait, that was later, wasn't it? When they were, well, anyway, they have a bit of a troubled past. They were enslaved for a good portion of their history and were sort of made to do terrible things. And they have since emancipated themselves and have sort of, many of them have sort of vowed to make sure that they are never made to do some of those terrible things again. So again, a super interesting, rich history. The 5 subclasses are basically the 5 elements, since they are the children of the elemental lords. What else should we talk about with the Ellery?
Yeah, and if I was going to compare them to, a 5e standard thing, it's almost like they're a bit of a hybrid between elves and genasi.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that's interesting about the Ellery, and one of the reasons that it's kind of hard to put a direct comparison to one core race, is that each of the 5 sub-races is so very different, to the point where there isn't actually an ability score increase tied to the Ellery in general. Each of the sub-races has their own completely different ability score increases. So the Life Ellery have charisma and wisdom increases, whereas the Fire Ellery have dexterity and intelligence increases, for example. So a lot of customization is available here, even within this one race. Anything else about the Ellery?
No, I think that covers them pretty well.
Okay, so then our next big section, our next big race section, are the Val. You want to tell us a little bit about the Val, Dan, while I continue to flip through this?
So the Val are interesting in, I guess the closest equivalent would be like Aasimar. In a way, although instead of like angelic bloodlines, essentially the idea is that the gods, after this God's War in the past, and I think it's the pantheon of man, sort of picked noble houses from human society and took their what are they, like the Valinor. So we can see here sort of, right, I think Valinor is actually, isn't that the word for the elf heaven in Lord of the Rings?
I didn't make that connection, but I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but sort of playing off the Valar, right, like Norse mythology. So basically took their servitors, their angelic, celestial servants, and infused them into these human bloodlines to make. I don't know how to describe them, but they're basically like humans that like Aasimar, but they have a very different status in an almost superhuman venerated status, because of their powers and leadership, and they're sort of tasked with protecting humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they, boy, do they ever know it. Just ask them.
Yeah, they're definitely, because I think there's at least one of the countries where they form the actual nobility, and they're the only ones allowed to sort of be the nobility. But as a heroic Val, I think the idea is that you've rejected some of that aspiration to sort of rule over humanity. This section is huge because essentially every god in the pantheon of man, which is a big pantheon,
yes it is,
has their like bloodline of Val. So like one of them quite literally is basically playing a quasi to full undead.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. What is the Nick? That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you get some undead features, and you can. Yeah, that was really interesting. How I'm curious how that balances out in a actual game, because there was a few things on the undead thing that I was a little like, that seems complicated and easily abused.
Yeah, and I think, if we're going by some of the art and how they associate things, so the first one we see is the Val Abibi, the children of Althares, who's the god of knowledge, and the art here, which I have up, right, is actually a black individual, right? It's very the art, I would say, is African inspired.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And like having looked over sort of the lists of interior artists, the art team was quite diverse in terms of who was there doing the art.
Yeah, and I think we see that pretty clearly, not just in the human art, but not every non-human race is defaulted to light skins. Yeah, definitely.
In fact, if I was going to say anything, I would say that the default that you tend to see for skin tones in the whole book is more sort of person of color, than sort of pasty white fantasy European crap.
Yes, correct. Yeah, I'm looking through, and Emma, since we're talking about the art real briefly, I'm looking through, and to your point, there are a few bits of art that aren't sort of very typical heroic physique, but perhaps not as much as we would like if we're going to be talking about body type inclusivity in the art. There are a few things. A lot of them are sort of either dwarves or well, there was a wizard in there that was kind of thick. I liked it. But yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. I think one of the barbarians maybe is too, but it's
yeah.
Weird almost. Yeah, that's a good point, Emma. There is, I'd say, age is something that you see diversity in the book, so that's
definitely good. Yeah, for sure. Cool. So that's the Val. And there's a bazillion subraces, and sort of like the Ellery, like there's a lot of customization that you can do within the Val subraces. There is a Val generic ability score increase that's a charisma increase. So there is something that sort of ties them all together mechanically. The Val also have blood rank, don't they?
If it's not called blood rank, it's something similar. These bloodline powers,
right? Similar to the Ellery, they're able to increase their blood rank at multiples of 4, where you get your ability score increases.
Yeah.
Cool. So just sort of real briefly, some of the other races are the Sressen, which are a sort of lizard creature that have a rather storied past. There are the Undeer, who they're sort of water something, right?
Yeah, they live on the water. They're sort of human,
right?
Like from the art, I get the impression that they're almost like halflings.
That was exactly what I thought. You know what I thought of when I saw the art and was reading about the Undyr? It made me think of, if anybody has read the Drizzt saga books, it made me think of Regis when he comes back to life as a oh, spoilers. Sorry, that's terrible. When he is brought back, spoiler alert, when he is brought back and is part water genasi. And so he's able to like swim really fast and stay underwater for a long time, but he's a halfling. That's very much that's definitely the feel that I got from the Undyr.
Yeah, because they have same lifespan as humans, size a little bit shorter, but they're not like halfling sized.
Right.
They're like 5'5" to 5, or 5 feet to like 5'8" is what's listed, so they're medium. Aquatic ancestry, and then there's like sort of a division within them between those who sort of stick to their traditional kind of ways, and then ones who've been sort of co-opted into what amounts to the Roman Empire, the Coriani Empire.
Right. Speaking of the Coriani, we have the Kio, which I think is the last of our new races. They are not Coriani. There's a little sidebar that I clocked about what happens when a Kio sort of breaks from their racial tradition and follows the Coriani way. But anyway, the Kio are I don't know what to compare them to. The first sentence of the Kio description is, the Kio are an ancient and mysterious race whose origins are clouded in mystery. Well, okay. Stat-wise, they are also in some ways similar to elves. Their ability scores increases. They have some proficiencies in weapons that elves, similar to the elves' weapon proficiency. They don't live quite as long as elves for sure. But yes, they are of a pantheon not of the god of man. They are related to celestials and deities from elsewhere. I wish I remembered more. This is probably the shortest race insert. It is a whole, for all intents and purposes, it's about a page long. Yeah, which, considering that we have 15, 20, 25 pages of Val, this is very short, which I guess is they're mysterious. Well, that's great. For anyone who's not super familiar with Arcanus and maybe doesn't know their storied history, might be a little tough to dig into. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I really get the impression that the book is very much centered on like the Coriani Empire as sort of the default idea, and then like a little bit. And so a lot of these races are from exterior to the Empire, and so they're like the rare.
Right. Okay, unless we have anything else to talk with races, we should probably jump into classes, since that's also a huge thing that's quite different.
Yeah, the biggest bulk is probably for the cleric, because every single deity has a subclass.
And each of their subclasses is heftier than... oh yes, Emma, we'll get to Scions. I cannot be objective about Psionics because I hate them. But I will try my best when we get to that section.
Whereas I love Psionics.
I want to play in a game that has Psionics with you, Dan, so you can teach me to love them, because I have had nothing but...
I haven't played Psionics since like 2nd edition. Dark Sun is like my Psionics. I
love their lore and I love like the storytelling opportunities, but mechanically I have yet to see a system that like makes them work in a way that I don't think is.
And I think I didn't like them in 3rd edition, and I didn't play them in 4th.
Yeah, I didn't play 4th, but
I'm not entirely sure that I'm gonna like what they do in 5th, but.
Just don't do. I know they're going to, but just don't. Anyway, all right, fine. Clerics. Each of the subclasses, right, which are essentially the equivalent of domains for clerics, right? Each of them is longer than we're used to seeing in the book, in the regular core books, because not every cleric has the ability to turn undead. In Arcanus. This was actually funny, a thing that the creator that I spoke to at Gen Con, like this was one of his points that he made to me about how the world is different and how it's very lore based. For in Arcanus, not every god holds dominion over the dead, and so not every god servitor has control over the dead. And so what that means is you have at least one additional paragraph in every subclass because there are two channel divinity options, and they both have to be listed in each and every subclass.
Yes.
Yeah,
and I like that, appropriately enough, the two gods who have dominion over the dead are the Lord of Tombs. I forget his name. It starts with an N. And like the goddess of life.
Yes, that's Ilir. That one I remember.
Man.
Right.
I don't know because it's not just the Pantheon of Man that have cleric subclasses in here.
Right. And
deities as well.
Yeah. There's so many. Neroth is the Lord of Tombs. Other than that, though, it's arranged pretty much like you would expect. You have your quote unquote domain spells that you get. You have your divine strike for a lot of them, or your empowered whatever at 8th level. You have your channel divinities. There is also one of the other things that sort of hefties up these sections is that each of them has a whole chunk that's like at least a third of a column in every subclass about the tenets of this faith.
Yeah, and there's like a prelude back here before you get into the subclasses about divine aspects and breaking your vows and like very much some guidance on like you're playing a cleric, you have strict you have things you're supposed to do,
right?
And if you deviate from those, like it sort of lays out to the player that the GM is going to take that into account.
I actually don't have a problem with that in particular, as long as your players sort of know that's the type of game you're running. If they're gonna play a cleric, what I will say though is that this is one of the things that to me feels very much like a 3.5 pullover. Back in the day where paladins had to be lawful good, monks had to be lawful. There were very specific rule and mechanic based things if you did something counter to your class's sort of tenets.
Right.
So this is one of the places that I think we see that. So tons of opportunities here in the clerics. They're also not all particularly good at healing, so there's that. And then we get into, once we leave the cleric section, we get into what we think of as arcane casters. And Arcanus has done something sort of interesting with arcane casters in that they've split them up into essentially two types of what they call sorcerer. It's the Elder Sorcerer and the Eldritch Sorcerer. And the difference here is that basically you have to get good and old before you can be an Elder Sorcerer. So you have to be of a race that lives a long time because their magic is patient, their magic is detailed, and their magic takes a lot of physical and mental maturing before you're even able to access it.
Yeah, I like the little bit on sort of the end of that description for the Elder Sorcerer. Where they sort of say, many wise and intelligent humans have attempted to master this, and they've all been driven mad. But I like that that's a little bit of an in, where it's like, if you really want to do this, right, and you could work with your GM and build like a really cool story around being a human Elder Sorcerer.
Absolutely.
And I think that might be kind of interesting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, they both have things. So these are the only, is this true? These are the only arcane casters, right? Options?
Let's see.
Because the Holy Champion and the Shaman are both quote unquote divine.
Yes, although,
I guess there's the Scion, but
one of the Ranger subclasses is also an arcane.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I forgot about that. Well, there are definitely fewer arcane casters, right? We don't have bards. I think bard is actually a subclass of rogue in this, isn't it? That's like throwback from the early days.
Yeah, that's a deep callback there.
Yeah, definitely. So that's over there. We don't have the equivalent of warlocks here. That's sort of shamans, although that's different. So if you're going to be a wizard sorcerer type, you're really locked into these two, either elder or eldritch sorcerers. And they both have elements of wizards and sorcerers, but I would say they both have meta magic. They're pretty skewed, in my opinion, towards the sorcerer sort of model.
Yes. Yeah, you get like arcane recovery like a wizard. So they are kind of a hybrid between wizard and sorcerer.
Definitely. But they have spells known. You don't prepare spells every day. You have your list of spells known. You have some what are called arcane points that allow you to do things, mess with meta magic, all of those things that in 5e we associate with sorcerers. Yeah, and then
this lore about being hunted.
oh, that's
All
right.
the arcane spellcasters are hunted by this sorcerer king.
And which to me was sort of one of the most compelling like campaign hooks is about like this. What is he's got a great name. What do they call him?
Yemendragor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, like if you're an arcane caster, you sort of like an almost in the Forgotten Realms. It was the setting of one of the Baldur's Gate books, right? That they have very strict laws about performing arcane magic in public without permission. Similar thing here. If you out yourself as an arcane caster, the Sorcerer King of Yemendragor will hunt you down, which is what a great like fun tension point for a campaign.
Yeah, and you know that's very much to me reminiscent of Dark Sun as well, right?
Sure, yeah.
The Sorcerer Kings are arcane casters, and they've got a cadre of arcane casters beholden to them, but otherwise you're hunted down.
Yeah, absolutely. So tons of fun lore and role playing and story opportunity there in that. Anything else about those three caster classes?
No, I mean they've all got their own subclasses as well.
Yeah.
So the various like elementalists and things, those again are where you get into racial restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a lot of that in the casters.
Which, I mean, I guess the lore for the elder sorcerers in particular is like these are the traditions of your people.
Mm-hmm.
And Eldritch Sorcerer is a little bit broader, but and like one of them is quasi sort of clerical for one of the one of the
the sorcerer priests.
Yeah, Sarashan sorcerer priests.
Mm-hmm.
There's something sort of they've got some basically blood magic kind of thing.
Is this the no, I think it's one of the shaman that also has a gender restriction, right?
There's a gender restriction in one of the cleric classes.
Oh, it's a cleric. That's what it was.
Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking of.
The lizard folk.
Mm-hmm.
Their deity, I think, is only women.
I believe that is true. Yeah, and then maybe it's the shaman lizard folk class that's only males.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. At any rate, yeah. So we see, and if we dig into the mechanics of this, we do see a lot of familiar stuff, but we see a lot of sort of interesting new takes on stuff, particularly the blood magic stuff with the sorcerer priests. Just new approaches, for the most part, laid out in consistent language that we're used to with 5e, so pretty easy to follow.
Yeah, I like there's a few art, I've got it up on the screen.
Oh, yeah.
The human Koryani Empire is very much like, they don't even hide the fact that it's like Roman Empire art, right? But I like this is the War Mage, and it's like a Roman centurion, like casting, like flaming hands, basically.
Yeah.
And I do... there's something about that imagery for me that really speaks. I love the image of like a soldier mage, not just a mage who goes to war, but a soldier who does magic.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we see sort of a very similar look as we move on to the next class in the book, which is the fighter. We sort of see that same sort of like braided leather sort of skirt on the warrior, big red tower shield. Doesn't have the plume like the War Mage did, but again, we see hints of that very recognizable sort of Roman influence. In terms of the class, the fighter, I mean, as it should be, in my opinion, is fairly straightforward. There are some different subclass options than we're used to seeing, but for the most part, it's all pretty straightforward.
A couple of different fighting styles, which are kind of neat. Like the pugilist, because there's no monk, so you can be a fighter who fights unarmed, and the knife fighter, which is interesting.
I did like the knife fighter, yeah.
And canny defense, which is a fighting style, so like not wearing armor and getting an unarmored defense as a fighter.
Yeah, I thought that one was interesting because as I was reading, I was like, oh, maybe there aren't barbarians, but then we get to the Furies and there definitely are barbarians.
Yeah, and the fighter canny defense keys off of intelligence, which I really liked. It gives me that new Sherlock Holmes, right? The analytical fighter.
10, Yeah, I was just counting to see, because there are a lot of fighting styles. I'm going to have a look in the core book, the core regular D&D book, because there are 10 fighting styles available for the fighter here, and that is significantly more than we have, as I recall, in the original core. Now I know we've expanded, but let's see. Fighting style for the fighter originally is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there's only 6 in the original one. And we see some familiar ones. We see archery, we see great weapon fighting, but then we have, like you said, the knife fighter, the pugilist, canny defense. So yeah, just tons of options. They did the work of a couple of splat books in addition to a core rule book in this book.
Yeah, and one thing, because I've got it up right now, so like you'll see champion. So that sounds like a familiar archetype.
Oh yeah,
it is not like the 5th. It's a totally different subclass.
Yeah. The only thing that looks like it carries over is that you also get the improved critical. But I think that's, and I don't even think you get that at the same level as you. I don't remember. I haven't played a fighter in forever.
It's different. There's like this master pugilist pit fighter. Like there's.
Yeah, lots of style options. And like you mentioned earlier, since there isn't a monk, right, since the barbarian is a little different, there are ways to sort of fill in those gaps from where familiar classes that we're used to seeing are not included.
Yeah, and we've got something that maybe approaches the people who really miss the warlord with the tactician.
Oh, the tactician. Yeah, strategic mind, sort of an intelligence-based fighter in some ways. Yeah, some proficiencies in intelligence skills and maneuvers, much like the battle master, but a little bit more about leading your troops. Yeah. Okay, then we get to the Fury, which is Arcanus's barbarian. Sort of like the fighter, we see a lot of familiar stuff. We see rage, we see unarmored defense, reckless attack, danger sense. Where we get sort of different are in what they call the paths, right? Oh, there are paths for barbarians too, aren't they?
That's right, yes.
We see a Path of the Berserker, which in some ways is similar to the Berserker that we know. You can frenzy and get an additional attack as a bonus action when you rage, things like that. But then there are some spirits that possess our Furies and give them their powers, which is sort of an interesting little bit of lore.
Yeah, and there is also, so we start again, we see some of the race restrictions.
Yeah, that's right.
So like the Path of the Possessed, which is where these spirits are, has this thing on, it's a primal casting class. And so there's like a slate of player races that cannot take that subclass. So again, it is pretty interwoven through.
Yeah. And I know we keep circling back to this. I have such mixed feelings about it, right? Because on the one hand, I love a setting with integrated lore that really like explains why classes are the way they are and why you can do the things that you can do and where that all comes from. I think that's super exciting because I'm a big lore nerd. But on the other hand, we are in a day and age where we're having conversations about removing ability scores from races because we want to acknowledge the diversity of individuals in the world. It does feel pretty archaic.
Yeah.
Despite my attraction to it, just sort of purely on a lore level.
Yeah, like the approach I sort of like, and I've seen before, is if you want to bake in the lore and sort of guide players, where you might say like this, this thing, this class or subclass. Is not something that, as written, we have like an analog in X, Y, and Z culture.
Right.
So like, if you want to take it, work with your DM to like figure out why that is, right? Like, why do you belong to, this religious order in the pantheon of man when you're, not human or
right. When you're a lizard person or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. I just realized what time it is. So if it's cool with you, we're going to move forward.
Yes,
so then we have the Holy Champion, which is essentially a paladin. There are 84 million subclasses because once again, we have one for basically every god that exists ever, forever. A lot of the conversation that we could have here is very similar to the cleric. We see a lot of familiar things. Each of the subclasses is pretty detailed because they're each tied to a specific god that has certain race restrictions and tenant things. But in terms of the layout, it's all pretty much the same. Lots of options for customizability here.
Yeah, the one that leaps out to me that some people might find interesting because it is so different than a normal paladin would be the Order of the Philosophic Warriors. So
that's exactly the one I'm looking at. Yep.
Because you're a flintlock wielding paladin.
Oh yeah, by the way, they're guns in our comics.
Yeah, there's guns.
By the way. But I think they're pretty tightly held by one culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, plenty to look at through there. Oh Lord, then we get to the Scion. It's, you know what, it's not bad. Mechanically, it's not bad. I don't love psionics. I don't, you know, I could go on for days, but actually it's not a badly balanced class. And I think the concept of psionics is pretty cool. Once again, this one, I think you have to be a Val specifically to be a Scion, right? Is that true? I feel like I remember that.
You have to have the psionic potential racial feature, something only the Val currently possesses.
Oh, they say that in a few places in this book. Something only the Val currently possess. I don't know what plans they have for future products and expansions of the lore, but there are a few little hints that might change eventually. That things might change down the road. Yeah. So there's Scion. There's a whole list of psionic abilities in the back of the book after you get to the spells. I'll let you talk about the Scion if you want.
Well, I mean, I would just say it's fairly typical of, you know, the approach to psionics that existed previously, which I don't think is what they're going to do for 5th edition.
Right.
With like powers, and there's sort of this difference between, you know, powers and disciplines, and so there's like different levels. It's kind of like cantrips and spells. And then there's these sort of other psionic traditions. Yeah, it felt to me very much like, you know, what I've seen of psionics kind of through the ages, as it were.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. So that's if you're dying for psionics before they get officially put out, dive in there. Next is the Ranger. Fairly familiar. The subclasses, we have Hunter and Master of the Hound. So there are definitely some variations from the core, but you've got your Hunter class, you've got your, you know, where each time you get a subclass feature, you get to pick from a list of 3 options that sort of determine your fighting style.
I think what a lot of people will like is, by default, other than the one subclass, this is a non-magic Ranger.
Yeah. The Talon of the Hawk is the magic. You get Herbcraft, which I did really like. I like that they had some mechanics for being able to create teas and ointments and things like that. Sort of a really going with the herbalism lore rather than the magic lore there.
And I gotta say, the Master of the Hounds really focuses on having a hound, but you know,
funny enough,
flavor that. The way they do with the animal companion is a very different take than the typical Ranger, and it's got some interesting stuff. Like it really does seem to focus on. I think the thing that leapt to me is if you've seen the latest John Wick movie. Halle Berry's character with the dogs, right, where they're like fighting as a very integrated unit, right? Like your dog is like grabbing someone by the leg while you, like, you know, shoot them in the head.
Yes, with your flintlock pistol, because you have those here. Yeah, absolutely. And I refuse to begin a discussion about the Beastmaster Ranger right now, but this is let's just say this is a different take, and I think some people might like parts of it for certain things that are not available.
Casting aspersions.
No, I know.
The Beastmaster, but it is a different take, and
yes, it is. Yes, it is. I'm just checking our viewer list, making sure Dan Dillon's not here with us right now. Love you, Dan. Cool. And then you do have your Magic Ranger still. If you want to go that way, you can be this Talon of the Hawk, Pathcaster. I'm trying to see if there's anything that jumps out at me particularly different. It's very sort of interestingly, you are still hunted by the Sorcerer King if you use Ranger magic, but it looks like a lot of the subclass features sort of revolve around, you've got Instinctive Counterspell, you've got Mage Slayer, you've got Enhanced Counterspell. Looks like it's a lot about shutting down casters with your own magic, which is sort of an interesting take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll admit, not having got into a bunch of the lore, like they're very specifically tied as essentially belonging to an order that's a secret group within the Sanctorum of the Arcane. And so they're very much involved in this like hunt of mages.
Yeah, I still think that's such a cool hook to
counter
use.
The Harvesters, which is also such a great name for.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Okay, so after the Ranger, we get to the Rogue. Again, you know, the basics, the general Rogue things, cunning action, still there, sneak attack, uncanny dodge, evasion, that sort of stuff, all still there. The subclasses rather, that we have are the Archaeologist, the Assassin, the Bard, as I mentioned earlier, and the Thief. The Thief looks pretty much like the Thief that we see in the core rulebook.
I think it is. I didn't notice any major differences. I
yeah,
think
me either.
Basically straight from the SRD.
Yeah. The Assassin is a little bit different. I love the Archaeologist, yes. Talk about it a little bit.
Well, it's just like, it's explicitly like you're a historian, you know linguistics, like you're a tomb raider. I like that one of your gains is called, well read, encyclopedic magic, and they get the classic use magic device, which is great. So like I just love that this is a rogue subclass that focuses on intelligence, and in the sort of Indiana Jones, Lara Croft kind of vein.
I think it does it better. I think it creates an intelligence rogue that is better than the Inquisitor, which we have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100% I would play this class.
Yes, absolutely. And I have no desire to really ever play an Inquisitor.
Yeah. No, me neither. Like, I love intelligence classes that are not wizards.
Yeah.
Because I like playing smart people.
That's why I want to play. It's why I want to enjoy psionics, whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So this is very much a class that I would play.
Totally. The Bard is interesting because you do have the ability to sort of be inspiring, and you have Song of Rest and Jack of all trades and things like that we see. But the Bard is not a caster subclass. You have actually no access to magic if you are a Bard rogue.
No, you get like the counter charm and stuff like that, and you're real good at talking to people.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, they're not a caster. And again, I kind of like it.
I don't mind it. Don't get me wrong. I love me a good bard, but I'm not upset that we don't have a traditional bard in this setting. I think the things that they've put in place for it are fine.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has played many bards, because quite frankly, they're one of the best options to be an arcane caster who can do other things. I agree,
and I do love playing them. But I think I would enjoy. I mean, I would play the Archaeologist if I was going to play a rogue, but. All right, so we move past the rogue. We get to the shaman, which is sort of druid, sort of warlock, it's more warlock than druid. I should have started with warlock, but
and I mean, they've got a sidebar here about the warlock in Arcane.
Oh yeah.
And they basically say like the classic warlock does exist but is not open to heroes,
right,
because warlocks are feared and hunted by cultures. Like they're basically really laying out like the warlock is like the witch,
right,
and is like, very much, if you make pacts with fiends, like people don't like you,
right,
and that the pacts are enforced a bit more than say what we see in 5th edition. Like if you make a deal with the devil will require you to do nasty things.
Yeah.
So, but
whereas as a shaman, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it feels like, and some of these are warlock subclasses like pacts that I have actively thought about, like making pacts with spirits and things like that.
Yeah, and it a lot of the subclasses do. They're called spiritual patrons. They're even called patrons, right? They do similar things to what
pact magic.
They have pact magic. They have additional spells that you get access to, just like your pacts. They do, the way that their pact magic scales is exactly like a warlock, right? You have one.
Yep.
Oh, except it looks like you get more slots a little quicker. Because I believe warlocks, regular
Yeah.
core warlocks, cap out at 3 slots, don't they?
It
I'll
might be
check. I've got
4,
it. I've got it
but I
open
think the
here.
progression does look a little bit faster.
Let's have a look. Oh, you're right. Okay, so we get 2 slots at 2nd level, which is standard for a warlock. We get 3 slots at. Oh
11.
God, nope. This is exactly the same.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm completely wrong. Okay. Anyway.
Is the spells known any different? Because
that's a good question. We
15.
top out at no. It's 1 per level until 9th level, and then 1 every other level. So no, that's all the same as well. And the cantrip. You do know fewer cantrips. Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't actually done this direct comparison. You do know fewer cantrips, though your what are called boons for the shaman match up with the invocations that you know. That's interesting.
Yeah.
No. Anyway, so yeah, this is about making deals with spirits, and there are taboos associated, as you mentioned, with each of these spirits that are much like we talked about with the cleric and the paladin, pretty serious if you break them. Anything else about the shamans? I know I'm sort of pushing, but we've been going an hour. So.
I think the thing I like is the variety, right? There's all of these like sort of culturally relevant spirits. Some of them have cool names, like the Prince of Night.
Mm-hmm.
Like some of them come from different pantheons. There's the Trickster. I think what I like is there's a little bit more variety in the themes.
You're also able to take spiritual paths. So just like you have your patron that you choose with a warlock, and then also your pact boon, there's a similar sort of thing with the spiritual paths. One of them that I think is sort of cool is the spirit speaker, where you actually get a companion spirit that follows you around and helps out, like a little pet called a Pajul. So just like you said, lots of variety and lots of opportunity for really cool sort of very otherworldly connections without being quite a warlock as we know it.
Yeah, and the boons are quite a bit different than the invocations.
Yes. Here we go. Wait, what am I looking at? Extended. Oh, here we go. Yeah. They're all based on specific animal spirits. Is that true? I'm looking through all of them. Oh, well, almost all of them. There's stone and water and fire. And so I guess there's some elemental ones as well. But yeah, they're quite different, and all of them also come with a gesh, a commandment, something that you, like a personality thing almost, that you have to abide by as you pick up these boons.
Yeah, and I can imagine as you start stacking these on.
Oh yeah, you're going to become sort of tied in to a very specific set of actions and beliefs and things that you can and can't do pretty quickly, because you already have one. If you've got if you are with one of those spiritual patrons, you've already got one taboo, and then every time you pick up a boon, up to 8, right at 19th level, that's a lot of things about your behavior.
Yeah, like if you have Spider as a boon, part of the Gaius is once per week you must create an artistic item through a handicraft. Yeah. And it must be given away to an individual who can make use of it. So,
there are also some boons that the commandment within them is in direct conflict with another boon. And it is possible to take both of them. So like you could take cat and dog boons, but you will only ever have access to one of them at a time, because by adhering to one of the strictures, you break the others and would have to atone to get the other ones back. But then when you atone, you've broken the other one. So you sort of have to be careful, I guess, in picking these things too.
Yeah, I think what I do like is because by the time you layer all these on and the different spiritual paths, it sort of ups the fact that, like, for me, I love Warlocks in 5th edition because I think they have some of the richest built-in roleplay elements.
Absolutely. Same. And, like, hard same.
And like lore and world connections. And I think these, like, even sort of ups that. And in a way that someone who also likes to engage in some level of optimization, or likes to have a lot of variety of choices to do customization, can like really sort of think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh-oh. There we go. Yeah, definitely. And that's the end of the class section. We then get into backgrounds, which have your typical backgrounds like we're used to in terms of format, right? You pick a background and it gives you access to certain additional skills and helps you flesh out your ideals, bonds, flaws, and personality traits, which they brought over quite well. There are also some things in these classes that tell you your, based on your background, your social class, and minimum ages, which again is like, that's such a 3.5 thing, right? Because like, didn't you, once you reached a certain age based on your race, you got certain ability changes? And so again, like this feels like a pull directly from the old days with things like that.
That goes right back to, I never played first edition, but 2E definitely had it, which was like you had to think about what age you were picking as a player, because when you hit like middle age and above, like your strength started decreasing.
Right. I don't want to talk about it. Yeah, no, it's true. So there's a lot of that in here, but there's some fascinating things. Also, there's a lot of information. So throughout this has been true, but there's a lot of information in these backgrounds that peppers in more lore about the world. Certain of these things certain of these backgrounds only exist in certain nations or among certain races or among certain cults or religious groups or what have you. There's a ton of lore to be found in here.
And some of them have implications to your social status as well, which affects your starting money. So whether you're poor, like lower class or upper class, gets factored in here. And you also pick nations, so which again also provide mechanical stuff.
Yeah, that's separate, as you said, from the background, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff.
The nations that give you your like ideals and bonds.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah, I'm flipping through it. I'm losing my... Yep, you're right. Yeah, so lots of options here. And again, just like with the core stuff, these are obviously jumping off points in terms of ideals, bonds, flaws, and personality traits, but there's so many to sort of pick through and look through and use as inspiration that there's a ton of resources that you can use here to create a really interesting, fleshed out character from the beginning.
Yeah.
We get into chapter 4. We finally get to equipment, weapons, armor, special materials, tools, mounts and vehicles, food and drink, lodging services. It really is just like the chapter in the core book, in the core handbook.
But bigger.
but so much bigger. Laid out the same, though, in that you have weapons tables and then specific details about the weapons. There's information about adventuring gear. There's information about how much it costs to stay at an inn, in what conditions, and all of that. So lots of information there. Anything we should point out?
I've got it up right now. They give an optional rule for large weapons and armor. So if you're a large-sized hero, and again, it's an optional rule, but it's interesting. They give it to you. So like both if you're wearing something or using something that's too big, or you get extra damage. I think the only other things I wanted to point out here, so they give you some sort of cultural elements, like these are the light armors that are common here. And like leather armor here is called this, and leather armor here is called this, and they look different, which is interesting. And the weapons table, if you're one of those people who doesn't like how 5e is just like, look, who cares if it's a longsword, a katana, or like whatever? It's like, here's the longsword stat. Have fun,
right?
If you want,
we got you.
Stats for all of that,
we got you. Oh man, but do we got you? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here.
Yeah,
which is fine. And again, right? Like I feel like philosophically and spiritually, 5e's sort of Wizards of the Coast sort of philosophy is like flavor it however you want. Here's the basics. And this feels very much like Days of Old, where it's like, nope, we have specifics for everything. We're gonna stat the hell out of it, and that's what I learned to play on. So like, I get the appeal of it. I do.
Absolutely, and the same here. And it's got some returns of like for me classics. Oh, thanks for the follow, Reddist. Like, the man catcher and bowlers.
Yeah.
And
yes. I did love those bowlers.
spiked chains and like how they've got like some different things you can do, because hopefully we'll have time, like when you get to the end, like they're like the feat section, what you can do for building a martial like weapon oriented character is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's go ahead and pop into chapter 5 then, because there's stuff in here that I definitely want to point out. So chapter 5 is it's called customization options, and it includes multiclassing and feats, just like we're familiar with. But it's also got some rules for things like allegiance and fame, renown, infamy, and one of the I love me a mysterious adventure hook, right? And there's a whole section on secret societies in here, and these societies they really run the gamut, right? From like very specific, like these people do this very specific thing and this is how you get in, to what is the one that's like, we don't really know what they're doing, they just do things. Is that the Feathers? No, who is that? Yeah, the Feathered Men. Is this weird secret society that like it's their goals no one really knows, and sometimes they set tasks for their members that are like like go move this rock from this street corner to another street corner, right? And that feels like it's like deeply steeped in mystery. It must be secret code, but like with the Feathermen, maybe not. Like maybe they just wanted you to move the rock.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of, I forget what, I was listening to some podcast recently and it was talking about sort of, these like the Masons or the Elk Lodges or whatever in the American West, which has come back. And it's a bunch of like historical enthusiasts who like to play pranks.
Yes.
And they like to find things and preserve like ridiculous things, like the oldest whorehouse in Colorado or something.
Right, absolutely.
Right? And so it very much reminds me of that. Like you want to be in a secret society, and this would be in Tal'Dorei. This is like people devoted to the Traveler.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like, this is totally Jester painting dicks on people's altars.
That's exactly what it is, right? And like, it's all, yeah, I really liked that one. I don't think I would use it because it would stress me out. I would want to give them a real concrete purpose, which I don't think is the point. But it made me laugh. I liked it.
Yeah, and there's like, so this is where the Sanctorum of the Arcane comes in, which is the group opposed to the Sorcerer King.
Right.
And this is where those Rangers, the Talons, are a part of, like, sort of to fighting the Sorcerer King. So again, just like this deep embedded lore.
I'll also say, and this is true throughout, of like subclasses and gods and organizations, it almost feels cliche at points, but in a way that I don't care. The names of some of these things are so beautifully fantasy, right? So you have things like the Mourners in Silence and the Sanctorum of the Arcane and the Emerald Society, right? They're just such evocative names throughout this book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then we have a little bit about multiclassing, sort of standard information about how to multiclass with the Arcanus classes. And then we get to feats. And let me tell you, there are some feats.
There are.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you were talking about, like in terms of customizing like a weapons master or that sort of thing?
So if we go down through, because some of these are like interesting all on their own, but yeah, so these like, is it the combat school training?
Yeah, that's towards the back or something. What is it called? Combat Schools of Arcanus.
Yeah, so like there's a feat for combat school training, and you take that as an entry, and then each combat school, and you can only belong to one, has basically like a little feat tree that you take combat school training again and again and again as a feat to like level through its stuff. So there's like a twin sword style. So if you want to like really do 2-weapon fighting, you start out, you've got maneuver DCs, and you build up through and you gain maneuvers related to using 2 weapons.
I will ask, because I read through all of them, but what I'm thinking about now, right? Because this reminds me of right, like you have to have dodge and you have to have what were the old feats that you had, power attack before you could have whatever, right? Yeah. So this feels a little bit like that. And as I think about that, I sort of think, feats were not a dime a dozen, but they came about a little more frequently in older editions. And so doing trees like that was a little bit easier. How do you feel about, you think this balance is okay?
I think you only have to do 2. So there's journeyman and master. So you only need to use 2 feats.
Oh, that's not so bad. I thought it was 3 for some reason. So that's not so bad.
I think it's because of the way they write it. So like if I'm looking, I've got Iron Hand up here. It gives you the first like maneuver, like here's your DC.
Right.
All of them have physical training, weapons, and then it goes journeyman. But if you read it, like the first one's in Iron Hand, physical training, when you first join this combat school.
Oh, yeah.
And then under the journeyman is you gain the following maneuvers and techniques when you join this combat school.
Right.
So I think you only have to take 2.
I think you are correct.
Most of them you get like 2 or 3 maneuvers for each one. So you're getting like 2 or 3. I guess you get a maneuver and a couple of techniques.
Right. There's a class. There's several, but there was an old 3.5 class that I always wanted to play that had like stances, which is sort of what these techniques feel like, and you can sort of change up your stances to have different sort of passive effects going on.
Yeah, and so like the maneuvers, like you've got your DCs, and techniques will key off the same thing. But for instance, with this one, the Iron Hand, the charge technique, when you take the dash action, you may make a single melee attack as a bonus action at the end of your move. If you hit, you deal double your proficiency bonus in additional damage. So like, it's all little things that don't necessarily cost you like extra things to do or resources that you need to spend. They're just cool things you can do in combat.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's very cool. And I think, like you said, like customizability, lots of options to create characters that we don't necessarily have easy mechanical ins to at the moment.
Yeah, and more because some of these trigger off of using reactions and bonus actions.
Yeah.
I think it means that for a lot of classes who don't normally have uses for those, you can actually put your bonus actions and reactions to use.
Cool. Anything else about feats or that chapter?
No, just it's extensive, right?
It is extensive.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. There is. And then we get to even more, which is the chapter on magic, which includes psionics. There's a whole primer at the front. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages are just sort of information describing how magic works in Arcanis, how it's different, how the arcane and divine magics are split up, how blood powers factor into that, how psionics work, and also a little bit about how some core rules spells function differently on Arcanis.
Yes. Also, magic's dangerous. Arcane magic will eventually kill you.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's that whole section about that's literally what the title of the sidebar is.
Yeah, there's no mechanics tied to it, so it's very much, it's not a punishment. It's like put there as a like, here's some cool role play.
Yeah,
you can tie to like as you've been using magic for like years and years. You start getting the smoker's cough kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there are a bunch of pages of new spells, right? There's some spell lists broken out by class that has access to them. And then, good grief, let's see. Oh, that's psionics. Where does the magic end? Magic ends here. So it's about 25 pages of new spells.
Yeah.
Are just not going to go through them individually, but are there any? To be honest, I don't remember any in particular that want to get highlighted. But I mean, like any spells, I don't know about you, but for me, like new spells are always exciting, and I'm not interested in all of them, but there's some fun and interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some real cool stuff in here that people like.
Then there's the chapter on psionics after that, which goes into more detail about how psionics work, psionic disciplines, the difference between focused abilities versus expressions of abilities, and how all of the psionics mechanics work. Like you said, it does sort of seem to be an updated take on the psionics that we've seen in previous editions, which probably won't match up with what ends up coming out of Wizards.
Yeah. I'm hoping some of the names will be the same again because some of the names are so cool and
Totally, totally, totally.
which for me back in 2E was what was so evocative about psionics.
Yeah.
Like if I look at the discipline list, right? Clairsentience, metacreation, metapsionics,
Yeah.
psychometabolism, right? But then like
Psychometabolism.
yeah, and then the Scion Power List. This is always like a couple of these leap out to me because
Mhm.
again, they existed back in second edition.
Right.
Ego Whip, Intellect
Yeah.
Fortress, right? Like
I
just
love
some
it.
of them have
Force
such
puppets.
cool
What great.
names. Force Puppet, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Mind thrust. Yeah, absolutely.
Tower of Iron Will.
Yeah, so that's all there for you if you're going to play a Scion. It's interesting. There's a whole chapter dedicated to a class that only one race can take, right? And
Yep.
it's interesting to me. Like the restrictions on the Scion class are such that like you need a very specific combination of character traits to be able to do this. But we have, an entire chapter of an 8-chapter book dedicated to describing it, which I guess that's inherent in psionics because they aren't magic. It's different, but it's just interesting to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't go through and see like how well all of this balances, but if you want psionics in your 5e game and you don't want to wait and you don't want to do it yourself,
Mm-hmm.
like you can lift that class and this chapter right out of this book.
Totally.
Just insert it and play.
Totally. Yeah, and actually, if anybody does, let us know. If anybody ends up with your hands on this book or is able to get at least the psionics out and you use it, let us know because I'm super curious how it all balances.
Yeah.
Cool. Is this true? The last chapter before we get to appendices, I suppose. Are there appendices? Yes, I think so. Maybe not. Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, though, chapter 8 is now our lore chapter. So this is the history of Arcanus, talks about all the nations of the known lands, talks about the religions, because we haven't talked enough about the gods and the classes. And this is definitely DM material, and it's pretty dense, right? There's a lot of text in this section. And again, there's some really interesting stuff. Some really great stuff. I look through though, and I see subheadings like gender roles, and I just sort of don't. I wish that that paragraph, that subheading, just didn't exist. Right? I wish that didn't need to be in the lore of Arcanus anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But it is very detailed. It's frankly, it's very interesting. It's like I said, we've had 18 years of lore in this world since it was released, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff, a lot of possibilities for adventures and campaigns.
And we get cool time periods with awesome names like Theocracy of the Cleansing Flame.
Yes, I'm telling you, these names, man. I can't name shit for my life, but these guys. Whew. Yeah,
that's a good comment, Corey. Like that's easily something where we could replace with like
totally
safety tools and pronouns.
Totally. Yeah, and I just, like we mentioned earlier, I think it's just that this stuff was baked into their setting from the beginning. And when they did this 5e port, I think a lot of it was direct translation rather than spiritual and philosophical adjustment, right? And adaptation, which is not a defense. It's just a statement of why I think it is the way that it is in this book. We get all of this information about the gods. We get their sigils. Then we get to the bestiary, which has some fun new animals. It's not a particularly extensive one. It's only 7 or 8 pages. So just a few new monsters, but some very sort of specific fun stuff that you can incorporate. Got a little list of new magic items. Although again, that's like 2 pages worth of stuff. And then that's the book.
Yeah.
So, what do you think? Let's just sort of what's your wrap up couple of sentences overall feel about Arcanus for 5e?
I think like for my personal sort of gaming interests and what I do, good resource. I don't think I would play a game set in Arcanus, but that's not a reflection on the book so much as how I tend to play. Like I barely even play in the Forgotten Realms because I just don't, I don't like dropping into big fleshed out settings, but I love using them as resources. I will happily pull organizations, countries, people, and in this case, like, it just has so many subclasses. I'd be interested to see how they play at the table.
Yeah, definitely same. I'm glad that you and I did this together because I do love dropping into massively fleshed out settings with huge expanses of lore that I can be a super fucking nerd about and like go in and spend weeks of all that free time that we all know I have learning the history of a new setting. It's one of the reasons that I do love the Forgotten Realms so much, because I have found over the years, I have found security in like being able to pull all these things. I've gotten past the worrying about screwing up the canon of a world. I don't care. It's my version of the realms, but I love being able to pull all these things from it. So in that respect, like Arcanis is super attractive to me that there is so much history. It's a little daunting because, as we've said several times, it's a big book. It is a dense book. There's a lot to get through. But if you're a real lore nerd, like go wild. There's a ton of stuff in here. There are a few things, a few of the new classes, a few of the races, a few of the things about it that I a little bit felt like were changed for change's sake. And I can sometimes, and this is actually probably a fault of mine rather than of anyone else or of anything else. But I do find that there are some things in the core Wizard released rules that I can get a little precious about just because I think they work perfectly well. And I don't see any real need to sort of mess with something that works. Particularly if the messed with version, in my opinion, again, sort of is either not as good or just different for different sake.
There's a few cases where, I mean, again, unless you were going to sort of say like to a player, like you can use anything from the standard 5th edition book and then here's all this extra stuff. But if you're going to say like, you know, all of these subclasses have to be tied to our lore, they do get between a rock and a hard place with something like the assassin, right? Like we have to make an assassin, but the assassin's not in the SRD, so we actually can't use it as is.
Right.
And we can't even sort of obliquely say see page whatever of the PHP, right?
Right.
So I can empathize with some things like that. But some of the core classes, like, you know, you could have just had the barbarian and not the fury and, you know, just built your own paths, right?
Totally. Yeah, so I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I think if I had more time, I might be interested in really digging into Arcanis and maybe playing an adventure there. I do think that a lot of the stuff that we talked about, a lot of the sort of problematic aspects about race and gender and things, I really do think that at least for me to be comfortable running in this world, I would have to do some overhauls of that stuff. Just because I'm not super interested in running a world that has a lot of that sort of stuff in it, you know. So I would make some changes there, but I could see my way into maybe wanting to do that work and play this. Great. So where can you find it if you are interested at the moment? So one of the things that we're doing with these Variant Roles reviews that we're going to be doing bi-weekly-ish is that we have been really fortunate and people have been reaching out to us and wanting us to sort of take on their materials and show them to the world. It's what we're doing with my Overlight game on Monday nights, and we're going to be doing it with a couple of other things. But you all know if you're fans of the channel, we are so packed. Our schedule is so packed these days, which is incredible, but it means that we just don't have the time or the space on the channel to play through and to show off everything that comes our way. And so the things that we aren't able to sort of schedule in for a regular game, we're going to be doing these reviews for. And so then if you all want to go out and find these products, Arcanis and some of the other stuff that we're going to be doing, and look into them and maybe down the road propose something for us that you want to play, we would totally be open to that. But these are the things that right now we as the Creative Council are not able to sort of schedule, but we still wanted to bring them to your attention. So where can you find it? You can, of course, go on to DriveThruRPG.com, where you can find freaking everything. Search for Arcanis and you can get the PDF version. And I don't know if you can get a hard copy version. it doesn't look like there's an option for that. But what I am seeing that I didn't know existed are some additional materials related to Arcanis that are available on DriveThruRPG as well. The Blessed Lands Codex Geographica for 5e, which looks like it might be sort of a lore thing. Sorceress Packs looks like it expands some of the packs that you're able to make with some of those character classes. Codex of Adventures, I bet that looks like, I'm going to click on that one actually. Yeah, so that's actually some adventures, some published adventures that you can run in Arcanis. And then, an introductory season packet for Living Arcanis. I was wrong. That is still a thing that exists. Perfect. So you can find all that on DriveThruRPG. You can also go to ParadigmConcepts.com. That's the publishing company that does Arcanis as well as a couple of other things. You can check out their shop there, order the hard copy if you desire, or just get the PDF.
Which would be a honking book, like Pathfinder 2e, like, 400 and...
Yeah, it's not...
I think it's about
420
with everything, yeah.
Yeah, it's not small. Here she is, and she's big. What else do we need to say? Thanks to the folks at Paradigm Concepts for reaching out to us and for providing us with these review copies. Thank all of you for hanging out. Thank you, Dan, for joining me. I actually, it didn't occur to me how different our approaches are to settings. I am really glad that we did this together, actually. What else?
I think that's about it.
Okay. If on the off chance you have joined us during this and you are not already following the channel, hit the heart button at the top of the browser so that you can get notifications when we go live with our myriad games that we have and our, again, hopefully bi-weekly Variant Roles review sessions. You can also follow the channel on Twitter at @VariantRoles. We appreciate you. The only reason that we have such great programming and as much of it as we do is because of y'all's enthusiasm and your support. If you are willing and able and can, and we understand that not everyone can or not everyone wants to, and that's totally fine, but if you can and if you want to, you can support the channel further by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/VariantRoles, and becoming a patron, or by subscribing to the channel here on Twitch. All of that is super helpful to us as we continue to expand and grow and do new and exciting things here on Variant Roles. Once again, I'm Eugenio, sometimes known as your friendly neighborhood dungeon master, DM Jazzy Hands. You can follow me on Twitter at @DMJazzyHands.
And I am Dan Gaston. You can also find me on the Twitters at MadSciEM.
Great. So right now, and stay tuned to the Twitter account and the shows on here. We'll talk about it more. But right now, the plan is to do another one of these in 2 weeks, which will be November 16th. And what do we have on the docket? I know I literally made the docket. It was me. I did it, and I don't remember what I put on. What did I say was next? Is it North Sea Epilogues?
It was definitely one of the Renegade games.
Yeah. Here we go. Yes, North Sea Epilogues. So hopefully on November 16th, we will be reviewing a game called the North Sea Epilogues. It is a rules light RPG based on some Vikings. It's actually based on a board game that Renegade Game Studios has out, but they've created a tabletop RPG for it. It's Vikings if you want to sort of avoid some of the more problematic and frankly violent aspects of Vikings. It's a cool system, and we'll be going through that in 2 weeks, hopefully on November 16th. So we hope to see you all, well before then, but definitely then as well. Same time, it'll be after our Descent into Avernus game, so at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific on Saturday the 16th.
All right. Perfect.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.